Greetings to my Valley Springs family. My thanks to those of y'all who responded to the Mo Willems video. I'm pleased that y'all shared my delight in that book and his work. But that got me thinking about other ways that I might make use of this format, other things I might be able to do. And in particular, as perhaps a way forward, something that I've really been kind of wrestling with the last few weeks, which is really how to understand the significance of this distancing and this isolation that we have voluntarily entered into with with the season of Lent, and what it means, these two things being fitted together. I'm an external processor. I need to get it out of my head so I can see what I think, but I've not been having a great deal of success with that. But had a bit of a breakthrough, I think, this week, something that's at least given me a bit more of a direction with it. I don't know if all y'all have seen this, the usually Christianity Today pastor's issue. I'm not sure if they sent it to everybody or just to some folks. If you've got it and haven't looked at it, I would really encourage it. Their 9 time-tested mantras for ministry they're valuable long way beyond ministry. There's a lot of really good stuff here, a lot of real wisdom, and one in particular for me, even more than the rest, which is saying something. Introduction to someone that I don't recall ever having heard of before, which is really too bad, because someone whose work has actually been pretty important for me over the years. That being Evagrius Ponticus. He's a 4th century monk, theologian, hermit, I believe, who really wrestled with the difficulties that the monks who went out into the Egyptian desert struggled with. I mean, they went into the desert. They went far from, well, not necessarily far from anyone else, but into isolation from anyone else, to free themselves from distractions so that they could, fight against the sins of the flesh. But of course, their flesh came with them, and so they were still dealing with the desires for physical pleasures, food and sex, that sort of thing. All the usual emotional issues. Just because you happen to be physically separated from somebody doesn't mean you're not angry at them, doesn't mean you don't have unresolved issues. And then of course, every time they struggled dealing with sadness, guilt at their own failures, that sort of thing. And so Evagrius wrote a book, wrote a work called On the 8 Thoughts. He summarized sort of 8 things that the monks were dealing with, which then over the course of time would actually evolve into the 7 deadly sins. And one of them, and the one that actually the article in this CT special issue is about. He's the one who gave the church the concept of Acedia. Now, this is a word. It's originally Greek. You could write with a K as well, as it would be more typical for the Greek, but it literally means a failure to care. And sort of the original use of the word in Greek was for the failure to care properly for the body of a deceased relative or someone like that. If you're familiar with the play Antigone, for instance, the Greek tragedy by I think that's Aeschylus. Don't remember between Aeschylus and Sophocles. Doesn't matter anyway. But that's very much the issue that was at play there. But Evagrius Ponticus took this word and applied it to the situation of the Egyptian monks. To quote from this article, by a professor at Biola, the temptation of a monk to abandon his spiritual vocation was, for Evagrius, like failing to care for a deceased family member. He dubbed Acedia the noonday demon, drawing on the language of Psalm 91, where the psalmist writes, "You will not fear the terror of night, nor the plague that destroys at midday." and really saw this as being sort of a spiritual plague that destroyed or threatened to destroy the monks right in the middle of their vocation, right in the middle of their calling. He described it. It's unlike, I mean, if you're familiar with the seven deadly sins, most of them, the focus is pretty obvious. I mean, gluttony, is about physical pleasures. I mean, lust is obvious. Pride. These all have sort of a direction. And unfortunately, the way that Acedia is translated typically in lists of the seven deadly sins, it's translated as sloth, which then makes it feel like it's just about laziness, inactivity, whatever. And that's actually unfortunate because it only captures half the picture, and it really reduces even that half. The author here writes, Evagrius describes it as a general in an army, dispatching temptation strategically to drive its victim from the spiritual battle. Because it can pop up in a number of different ways, and in fact, even in two directions. Fundamentally, what it's about, I've heard it described as the sin of not caring enough about anything. And it's about being in a position where what you're called to do just really feels like it's too hard and too much energy to be worth it. You just don't care enough about it to be able to summon up the will to actually do it. And it's the temptation to sort of give in to that feeling and go looking for something that will give you the energy to do something. And so sloth, is sort of the low energy state, version of that. So the lapse into torpor, sort of the most extreme, not caring enough to move. At the most extreme, really shifting, sliding into despair, where just like life doesn't feel worth it. Nothing feels worth making any effort about, or into the more subtle sorts of things, like spending a couple of hours mindlessly link surfing, clicking from one article you don't really care about to another article you don't really care about, or reading something that you've reread so many times it's really not interesting to you anymore, but it's familiar, it demands nothing of you, and it's giving you at least a little something. The flip side to that actually is hyperactivity. That's sort of the high energy state version. If you've got something that you can go do that will sort of give you immediate gratification, going and pursuing that. So for a lot of people, workaholism actually looks like that. Very high productivity sort of thing. Because it's like if you go and you do, you're going to get the emotional rewards. You're going to get what gives you the feeling that it's worth doing. That it's worth expending the energy. This Acedia is a real temptation for pastors, whether because ministry burnout is one ultimate manifestation of that. Being in ministry situations where nothing you do seems to make any difference, whatever. You pour your life and your energy into people, and they simply don't grow. Whether they continue doing foolish and sinful things, whether their hearts just keep getting harder and harder and harder. On the flip side, for pastors who get really a lot of plaudits from the church they serve, and get a lot of emotional energy, a lot of stimulation. Then there's the temptation to just pour all their time and energy into the church and neglect family, because those relationships really actually demand something of them that doesn't come easily, and don't give don't give praise cheaply, and so you end up with that sort of workaholism. And this is something that's been a struggle of mine as well, which is why I say Evagrius' work is really of importance to me. The author, like I say, a biology professor, notes that she says, when I describe Acedia in my classes, I often use the example of a student who has a major paper to write by morning. The student sits down to write, but soon finds herself drifting down the hallway for a snack to help her concentrate. checking her email, cleaning her desk, or looking up the lyrics of that great song she just heard on Spotify. Um, actually, which makes me kind of wonder, as I'm recognizing days that have gone like that, wondering if maybe Acedia is a particular issue for those of us with ADD and sort of the stim junkie tendencies that, in particular, that we have to work against. But the bottom line with all of it, as I say, is I don't have the energy to do what I'm actually called to do. So I'm going to pursue some sort of stimulation, whether high or low energy, some sort of stimulation that will give me a reward. That will give me an immediate reward. It is. I mean, it's sort of mindset, I think, that leads a lot of people into addiction. Whether that be obviously sliding into alcoholism, other forms of drug addiction, video game addiction, something. I mean, in our sort of broader area, I mean, there's a lot of teens that I think are very much victims of acedia. They just don't care enough. They don't care much about anything. Sarah and I both seen that. Me just in my 1 year of subbing, and her in the time that she spent. And so I mean, they get into video games or whatever it might be. They get addicted to their screens because that gives them. It gives them stimulation. It gives them some degree of pleasure without having to really put the energy in, because there's nothing. There's nothing that's obviously worth putting any energy into. Is really kind of the bottom line. This is, well, I mean, in terms of drug addiction, the author Kathleen Norris is quoted here. You might be familiar with her from some of her books, most likely The Cloister Walker, Dakota. I think those are the best known. But apparently she wrote a book called Acedia and Me, where she writes, "When life becomes too challenging and engagement with others too demanding, acedia offers a kind of spiritual morphine. You know the pain is there, yet you can't rouse yourself to care. That it hurts to care is borne out in etymology, for care derives from an Indo-European word meaning to cry out, as in a lament. Caring is not passive, but an assertion that no matter how strained and messy our relationships can be, it is worth something to be present with others, doing our small part. Care is also required for the daily routines that acedia would have us suppress or deny as meaningless repetition or too much bother." And so, thinking about this, and thinking about this in the context of Lent and in the context of sort of our quasi-monasticism at the moment, I think there's something important here. In the article, she talks about a seminary graduate, I would presume from the school there at Biola, described to me the temptation to fantasize about a future in which he is the senior pastor of a congregation, what his schedule would look like, how he would spend his salary, and more. He feels tempted to avoid the difficult call to wait patiently and actively in the Lord, and he struggles to trust that God will make use of the discipline he develops during this season. Active waiting requires a belief that God is teaching him how to hope without falling into presumption. On the one hand, I'm hoping, therefore I deserve to get what I want to get. God has to give me what I want. Or despair. I hope for this, but it's never going to happen. But it can be exhausting, and it is easy to slip into a posture of forgetfulness or discontentedness in the present season. And so in a lot of ways, the sort of the opposite to acedia, is this active waiting, and is the sort of sustained practice of silence, of sustained attention to what's going on in my heart, what's going on in my life, what's going on in my relationships with others. What is what is the way that sin is manifesting itself? How is it that God is working? What is God calling me to? How is He calling me to serve in this time? And that's all the stuff that that acedia is really trying to distract us from, trying to pull us away from. And not necessarily bad things. I mean, a lot of the things that we may get sucked into instead are good in and of themselves, they're just not what we're supposed to be doing. We're not doing them for the right reasons. And actually, in the quote from Evagrius Ponticus here, it notes that. He says, the spirit of Acedia drives the monk out of his cell, but the monk who possesses perseverance will ever cultivate stillness. A person afflicted with Acedia proposes visiting the sick. This is a good thing, right? But is fulfilling his own purpose. Not doing it for the right reason. He's doing it as a way to avoid the hard work. He's doing it because it will provide stimulation, because it will provide reward. And that's why, as I say, it can go in the direction of activity rather than inactivity. But the root of it is, am I seeking something which will provide me the instant gratification, which will simply provide me with cheap stimulation? That's really the bottom line to it. And what we're called to do, and it's hard to do in our very busy and loud culture, but we're called to turn away from that sort of immediate gratification and the stimulation, and practice solitude and silence, and the other spiritual disciplines, to practice that attentiveness. And the thing about our current economic season and medical season, is that it's actually, for those of us, who are idled, largely idled by everything that's going on. I know there are some for whom things have just gotten busier, with all of it, and that's its own set of issues, its own set of temptations. For those of us who've largely been idle, then we're in a position where we've got this space created, for silence, to sort of silence ourselves in the presence of God and just wait and listen, to what He will say. And He will speak, not necessarily then. Sometimes we just have to sit in His silence, but He will speak in His own way and in His time, and very often, in a way that, and from a direction that we would never have expected. You can hear the word of God from a crow under the right set of circumstances. It has happened before, and it would not. And of course, from a donkey, look at Balaam, but but we have that space, we have that time to practice that, and that is in a sense a gift, actually, in the middle of all of it. It's an opportunity to really kind of lean in to Lent. And for those for whom things have just gotten more hectic, as they're in a position where sort of more of the energy of society is now landing on their heads because so much is shut down. For folks in that situation, it's more a matter of not simply riding the wave of stimulation, but really having to fight against that and create whatever opportunities there may be for attention to the soul, for simply sitting with God, and for obviously cultivating our relationships with others, with family and friends. But and that is on the whole, that's a relatively small part of our population at this point. For the majority of us, it's more a matter of we have the opportunity, if we'll take it, to turn the enforcement that's been piled on us of lockdown, stay at home order, that sort of thing, into spiritual discipline, to use it intentionally, to pursue the Lord, to open ourselves up to the Lord, which means that even for those of us for whom Acedia has not been a primary temptation, it's going to be a primary temptation. And the downside of this is if we simply give in to it, and if we kind of let it run however many weeks this runs, then we could come out of this time, and whenever we can come back together, we could come out spiritually weakened by all of it, really having fallen to temptation in whole new ways, ways that really were not a major issue for us before. But if we are willing to sort of stay in place and not be, distracted, not be led away, not be driven away, then that sets the opportunity for spiritual discipline, that is the sort of training that Paul says produces godliness. As the author writes here, Acedia, Evagrius says, searches out our weaknesses. Yet as Paul wrote in Romans 8:28, God can co-opt even this temptation for our benefit in his glory. When we have learned to resist Acedia, we enter into a new kind of spiritual stability. It's like a rigorous training ground that breeds in us greater discipline and devotion if we can learn to not succumb to it. Fighting Acedia reminds us to hope in God, who brings fruit from our labor even if we struggle to see it. And that actually is a lot of the response to it, is trusting that, choosing to act in trust, that even if we don't see it, that it is actually worth it, and God is at work, and it is actually accomplishing something. So, as I said, this is something this whole question of lockdown in Lent, Lent in the time of COVID-19, is something I'll continue to think about, continue to reflect on. But I do think that, at least ways that, courtesy of CT and Evagrius Ponticus, I think I've at least got some sense for kind of what's going on here, and a sense that there really is an opportunity to make a virtue of necessity, to make a spiritual virtue and a spiritual discipline, of a physical necessity. And I will be praying, for you in this, praying for all of us together in this, that we really would actively struggle together against this temptation to Acedia, against this temptation to not care enough, but to keep sort of putting the effort in, putting the trust in to care and to really engage with the struggles to which God has specifically called us in this time. So, anyway, just a few thoughts for this time, for this season. If you've gotten this far, I thank you for listening. Take care. God bless, and I will talk to you soon.